we're going to kick off with our first story, which is probably the biggest news in space, although maybe it shouldn't be. And we'll come on to that. So, Jeff Bezos is continuing with his suborbital hops using the New Shepard, named after Alan Shepard, obviously the first person to fly on the Mercury spacecraft in the early 1960s, first American astronaut in space. These suborbital hops, if you don't know what they are, basically it's an up and down flight. You go into space, you're in space for a few minutes, you float around for a few minutes, and then you come back down again. Unlike the orbital missions that SpaceX, etc., are doing, very similar to Virgin Galactic, what they're doing, but obviously Virgin Galactic aren't quite getting into what most people consider to be space, but it's another debate altogether. Anyway, so a few months ago, they had Wally Funk. Now, Wally Funk was one of the Mercury 13 women, phenomenal group of ladies who in the 1960s proved that they were every bit as good as all of the American male astronauts in terms of the training, etc., but they never got a chance to fly. So Jeff Bezos decided to put one of them, Wally Funk, who was 82 at the time, into a spacecraft. Now, the great thing about this is, A, it was fantastic PR from Bezos's perspective. He got Wally Funk up. Wally Funk's very highly respected, very revered by a lot of people, and it was great to see. And an octogenarian going into space, that was something else. Again, it proved that you didn't need to be this kind of test pilot mindset, mentality, physique, etc., that was almost de rigueur in the 60s. This has now been beaten by probably one of the most famous actors on the planet for anything to do with space, and that's William Shatner. Now, I don't need really to introduce William Shatner, but if you don't know who he is, Star Trek. Captain Kirk. He was the original Captain Kirk in Star Trek before J.J. Abrams and everyone else came along with reboots and reworkings and what have you. So William Shatner is now 90 years old, and after Star Trek, he did T.J. Hooker and a few other acting things. He's really famous for his music. He does phenomenally funny sing-alongs. Well worth a listen to. Anyway, so Shatner goes up on one of these 10-minute suborbital hops, comes back down, and again, this is phenomenal PR from Amazon. Now, let's not forget that Amazon are the largest company on Earth. Like, we're talking about one of, and it alternates regularly, one of the two richest people on the planet is Jeff Bezos. The guy's worth hundreds of billions. His company's worth trillions. So putting these people on his flights, probably a drop in the ocean in terms of cost to him, is next to nothing. I mean, these flights cost on average about $10 million for the whole thing. The average cost for the people who go on them, these little 10-minute suborbital hops, is about £150,000. So putting him on this flight was a really good PR scoop. And to be fair, compared to Wally Funk, when Wally Funk came down, there was a lot of emotion, etc. But then since the flight, she said, wasn't all she expected, kind of thing. Shatner's come down and he was in tears. I mean, he said this was an absolutely profound experience. And don't forget, he's played a captain of a spacecraft for decades. However, the interesting thing then that came out from this, after the experience of him coming back down and talking to press, etc., was that the UK's Prince William. So this is basically second in line to the throne. Once the Queen passes away, we'll have Prince Charles, then Prince William, his son. So second in line to the throne, who has been instrumental in some very big environmentally related projects of late, the most famous being the Earthshot. If you've not heard about Earthshot, just Google it. It's really, really interesting and important project to try and develop ideas that will help the sustainability of the planet, things like clearing up the oceans, restoring the forests, etc., etc. The first Earthshot prize was a few days ago, and Prince William was there presenting it. Now, Prince William came out and basically was very critical of this, and there's been a lot of backlash over the whole billionaires in space tourism thing. Whilst most people respect and understand the need for, innovation and development, I'm not saying all of this is bad, but as I said, there's been a huge backlash. There was a big backlash against Richard Branson with his Virgin Galactic stunts, and the fact that he deviated from the flight plan and caused all sorts of anomalies to trigger investigations now from the US authorities isn't a good thing. But Bezos has played it very clean, very safe, and he is doing great work in terms of the innovation. He's been a very strong supporter of the space sector in general, and is planning his own constellation, which that's a whole other, we talked about this many times. Prince William was kind of like, well, instead of sending like actors and millionaires, etc., into space, and don't forget, Bezos, this is a commercial venture for him. He needs to get a return on his investment. It's his money that he's put into the whole thing with Blue Origin and New Shepard and New Glenn to follow, and then possibly New Armstrong, etc. And the fact that he's also, suing NASA at the moment, he's got a bit of a PR job to do right now, because he obviously got cut out of the lunar lander program. So he's got a bit of a PR job. Prince William saying, we need some of the world's greatest brains and minds fixed on trying to repair this planet and not trying to find the next place to go and live. So a lot of people kind of thought about this and thought, well, Prince William's right in many respects, in that we don't want to see billionaires going up into space and on these space jollies. And there's going to be about 200 to 300 more people who've booked on Jeff Bezos's flights and on Virgin Galactic who are going to be going up. And these people are all extremely rich people. Now, given the current situation of the planet and what's happening with climate change and post-pandemic, etc., this is not going down well. So interestingly then, William Shatner responded to this, and his response, whilst probably very well-meaning, was again quite explosive. I mean, he was then talking about, we've got all this technology, we've got the rockets, we should build a base in low Earth orbit, which we have. Obviously, the International Space Station is a prime example of this, and then send the power down here and catch it and use it there. So he's talking about, satellites being able to beam solar power down to Earth, etc., which in itself isn't a bad idea. There's some real merits into commercialization of space, and real merits into the scientific exploitation of space if it can be put to good scientific use and good use, which will benefit all of us. But I think the ramifications of what's happened in the past week or so, not only with this, but the next story we're going to talk about, has ironed a lot of people. I don't know what you think about this, Terry, if the reaction's been the same in Ireland, but in the British press, it's been very mixed.
Yeah, I thought it was excellent from the point of view of just indicating how profound an experience it is. And if you think back to some of the iconic photos that came with the space program, the first photograph of the Earth as a complete planet, particularly the blue marble rising over the moon from the Apollo flights, that to a very large extent was responsible for kickstarting the environmental movement, because it let everybody see that we really are just a tiny little ball floating in space. This is planet A and there's no planet B, and we need to look after this one. And even though William Shatner didn't go into a full orbit, I actually would wonder what his reaction would have been if he'd been high enough up and long enough up to do a full orbit of the Earth. I imagine he would have been totally overcome. But the point I'm trying to make is going up into space and looking at the Earth from space, where there are no borders, no boundaries between countries. You see the Earth as one planet, and it's the only planet we have. And that actually is a very good way of getting across to the public just how important the environmental aspect is. And I think that the fact that Shatner, who, as Captain Kirk, was never fazed by anything, was actually sort of so emotionally involved and so emotionally affected by seeing the Earth from space. That actually was a very good thing. Now, it was a publicity stunt, and I just think it happened to be a particularly good one. And going on to what some of the other angles that we were talking about there, and sending power from Earth orbit down to the surface, there are other angles as well, such as mining the moon for helium-3, which would be a very, very powerful and clean power source for energy on the Earth. So I don't think we can confine ourselves to planet Earth. Certainly, there are lots of things that need to be done here. And I'm not so sure about Jeff Bezos going to Mars as a spare planet, if you like, but there's certainly an awful lot that can be done in the Earth-Moon system, which will benefit the whole planet.
I completely agree, and I think this has been brought across by several people, quite high-profile people in terms of the space sector on Twitter, that, and I, myself, and I know Cameron Porker and various other people have been talking about this. There's so many aspects that we need to get across to the public, the real benefits of space, and I don't think those are being put across in the right way. And this is the thing: Shatner's, emotional response was beautiful. It really was, great to see. And I think if we sent up, more politicians, for example, and people who could actually make a change and have a real influence on the planet. You only have to look at what happened with Apollo 8. Apollo 8 was supposed to be a trip to the moon. It ended up being this is our Earth. They rounded the moon. They saw the Earthrise picture, as it were, and that sparked the entire environmental movement. So there's definitely something to to come from this, but it's who you send up to really convey that. And if you send up YouTube stars and social media influencers, yes, but you're almost preaching, in some respects, you're preaching to the converted, because the younger generation, the Greta Thunberg generation, the followers of what's happening with the climate, the people who are really invested in climate change, much more so than possibly some of the older generation are in terms of reaction and response to it. I think that there's real mileage and traction here that could be gained. I don't know. It's interesting.